On January 20th, 1969, Richard Nixon was inaugurated president. The environment hadn't been an issue in the 1968 campaign, but he mentioned it briefly in his inaugural address.
In protecting our environment, enhancing the quality of life, and all these and more, we will and must press urgently forward.
Suddenly, 8 days later, on January 28, 1969, the environment became a very big issue. A blowout on an oil rig in the Santa Barbara Channel started a spill that precipitated an environmental catastrophe. 3 million gallons of crude oil polluted the ocean and created a slick that devastated 35 miles of the California coast. Inspecting the damage, the new president said, "I don't think we have paid enough attention to this. We are going to do a better job than we have done in the past." With the environment, he chose the smartest and most dedicated aides and advisors, told them to do the right thing, and promised them his support. In his first State of the Union message, delivered on January 22, 1970, he identified the environment as the defining issue of the new decade.
The great question of the 70s is, shall we surrender to our surroundings, or shall we make our peace with nature and begin to make reparations for the damage we have done to our air, to our land, and to our water?
Determined to make a difference, President Nixon kept up a steady stream of bills and executive actions. The Democrats opposed many, and the Republicans weren't always enthusiastic.
18 of the major environmental proposals which I put forward a year ago have still not received final action by the Congress. I repeat today my urgent request for congressional action on this much-needed legislation. And I am also presenting a number of new proposals. These problems will not stand still for politics or for partisanship. They demand to be met now.
The issue was of national concern. President Nixon was able to create a record and leave a legacy of environmental breakthroughs and milestones that still shapes our world today.
President Nixon was visionary on this. There's just no question about it. The first president to set aside public lands was Abraham Lincoln. We know what Teddy Roosevelt did with the national parks. And then you have Richard Nixon, who not only established EPA, but if you think about the Clean Water Act and the Safe Drinking Water Act, all the things that were part of that were NEPA, the things that he implemented are extraordinary and far-reaching.
His transformational environmental legacy includes creating EPA, reducing emissions from cars and diesel engines, removing lead from gasoline and paint, protecting wetlands from development, eliminating use of destructive pesticides, cleaning up polluted sites, prohibiting ocean dumping, remediating cancer-causing asbestos, reducing acid rain, creating and promoting the Energy Star program. And his environmental legacy lives on today because of the Council on Environmental Quality, the Clean Water Act, the Clean Water Drinking Act, the Clean Air Act, the Endangered Species Act, the Marine Mammal Protection Act, creation of NOAA and hurricane tracking, the Federal Environmental Pesticides Control Act. A poll named Richard Nixon the second greenest president in U.S. history, second only to Theodore Roosevelt. Russell Train, the second EPA administrator and president of the World Wildlife Fund, wrote, "In large part, the results of the Nixon initiatives remain in place today and form the foundation for the country's ongoing environmental programs."
The reason is because the ESA is probably the most powerful law in the land, and certain people know how to use it and misuse it to force their opinions and their economic theories over the rest of us.
If you can write an environmental impact statement that will hold up in court, I'll do it. I won't make any friends in the Rocky Mountain West, but I'll do it.
First off, this is kind of unusual, isn't it? We've got something in common here.
mother-in-law was.
We're talking about the ESA today, but the bottom line is that the federal government has failed in their obligations and their promises to all the people in the basin, tribal peoples included. So there is something common, and I'd ask you to think about that as we go through the day. I'd also ask you to think about what it is that we can work on together. If you think about it, as far as the tribe is concerned, ESA has not saved our species. We agree with that. But the federal government has a much larger obligation to protect more species and protect the wildlife and the plants that we depend upon. You also need to recognize that tribal people in this basin are families, their parents, their children, their grandparents that want to see the best for their kids. They want to see the best for their families. And I think that's something in common in the basin as well.
I've been an attorney for a little over 25 years, and most of my work is in the area of Endangered Species Act, water rights, and working with farmers, irrigators, and irrigation districts. The Endangered Species Act is pretty much the most powerful environmental statute that Congress has ever passed. There are several different sections of the Endangered Species Act that come into play. The one that is kind of the trigger is known as Section 9. It's the prohibition on take. And it says that even if you are engaged in an otherwise legal activity, if you take, which means essentially harm, kill, modify, adversely modify habitat, then you are liable for having harmed that listed species. And if you're found guilty of that, it's $25,000 per violation, and it's up to a year in prison for every violation you have. So the Act also includes a couple of ways to deal with the fact that if you're engaged in an otherwise legal activity, such as exercising your water rights, that you can get coverage or basically authorization to legally take or harm or kill those listed species. And so for federal agencies, they go through a process that's under Section 7 of the Act. Under that, they go through a process where they have to prove that whatever federal action that they're undertaking, it will not jeopardize the continued existence of the listed species. And so they'll put together a biological assessment. The services, Fish and Wildlife or National Marine Fisheries Service, will come back with a biological opinion as to whether or not their actions and proposed mitigation are okay to go forward and not going to jeopardize the continued existence of the species. And if they succeed in that, they get an incidental take statement, which again authorizes the federal agency to take or harm or kill listed species. Meanwhile, for non-federal agencies, which would include irrigation districts, private property owners, anybody, cities, they can pursue a permit under Section 10 of the Act. And under Section 10, to get the authorization to legally harm or take or kill a listed species, you have to put together a habitat conservation plan. There are standards as to what that plan has to do and what it has to meet. And if it passes muster with the services and they approve it, then they will give you an incidental take permit. You look at pretty much any other basin in Oregon, the Pacific Northwest, or the West, where the tribes don't have an interest in the hydro project, they're almost universally opposed. So down in Klamath, the Klamath tribes have been all about getting the Klamath dams out. On the Columbia River, Snake River dams, the tribes have been all about getting the dams out. And here, of course, when the tribes took on an ownership interest, things changed. In the meantime, I just say that the other context there, we were all here in the basin looking at Klamath. And in 2001, I think as everybody is well aware, water got shut off. There's been a fight about it ever since. 20 years later, they still don't have water. I was at a meeting for the Oregon Water Resources Congress, which is the trade association that represents all the irrigation districts in Oregon, last week. And a couple of the district guys from Klamath were there, and they said, probably not getting water. They didn't get water last year. They're probably not going to get water this year, even if their snowpack, which is low, gets up to 40%. You know, in the past, that would have been an okay water year. They'd get something. Now with 40% snowpack, they get zero. And part of the reason they get zero is because they don't have an HCP, they don't have a permit. We'll get into a little bit more of the detail later, but they've kind of left it up to reclamation to look out for endangered species, and reclamation didn't do them any favors. So because of all the work that we'd been doing on the HCP and the fact that we weren't just sitting on our hands doing nothing. Also, we had the Confederate Tribes of the Warm Springs on our site as well. And that's because during the HCP process, we were very much included them. Again, as we just talked about, they have an ownership interest in Pelton Round Butte. And obviously the fish species, part of the reintroduction there, very important for not only the FERC license, but also their cultural resource interests as well. One really important thing that I think gets overlooked, while we were doing the HCP and trying to get to the ITP, there was a parallel process that Reclamation had to go through under Section 7. Because regardless of whether or not we got the ITP and finished the HCP, Bureau of Reclamation still needed its own ESA compliance coverage, which happens during Section 7. So they were preparing their own BA. The biological opinion that was issued by Fish and Wildlife Service covered not only our activities, but their activities as well. And that did result in an incidental take statement for them. Very significantly, and it's part of the reason we went down the HCP path in the first place, was that we wanted to be able for the districts to control their own destiny. If the districts weren't going to play and we're going to sit on the sidelines and wait for Reclamation to go, we would not have gotten to the same endpoint that we got to. And if you look at Klamath, it's kind of what happened. The districts there, I know that they've tried to settle and do some things in the past, but they don't have an HCP, they didn't play. So the ESA compliance and everything that's run down in Klamath is run through Section 7, and it's run by Reclamation. And quite frankly, the districts not only have to fend off environmental groups, tribes, but they're also at war really with Reclamation as well. And so part of our concern is that if you just leave it to Section 7, there's a chance you're going to get run over, and then you're kind of playing defense as opposed to trying to get out in front. The thing that happened in our basin was that Reclamation agreed to let us get out in front, and they didn't add on any additional requirements. It's basically their Section 7 is to work with the districts and implement what the districts committed to. And so even though there are two layers, I bring that up because there's been talk about, can we just reject the HCP and go away, and won't we be fine? We'll just go to court and win. Case law is pretty good, or I shouldn't say good. Case law is fairly consistent that the ESA trumps state water rights. And B, even if we were to win somewhere in that mix, Reclamation's still going to be doing their own thing. And then at that point, we kind of lose control over a lot of that. Last thing I just say about Klamath, they've lost repeatedly on ESA versus water rights, and so their fallback position was to kind of go the Fifth Amendment takings route under the U.S. Constitution as well as the state constitution. And we participated in, my firm participated in an amicus brief to the U.S. Supreme Court to try to get them to take that case in favor of the takings, and the Supreme Court rejected it and said, nope, if water is taken for ESA under the contracts and whatnot that they had there's no compensation. So in many ways, the argument was to say, look, it's no different than land, and if the government comes and says we need your land for a highway, they can kind of do it, eminent domain, but they got to reimburse you. So we made the same argument. The districts have been making that same argument for 20 years, and here we are in 2022, and there's no water, there's no deal, and they're still in court, and so.